Hi YouTube, today I'm going to be showing you a quick video on how to remove and replace the exhaust manifold and catalytic converter assembly on your 2001 through 2005 Honda Civic. Now this procedure only applies to vehicles equipped with the 1.7 liter engine, and either the SI or the SIR, if you're in Canada, is exempt from this procedure because those engines use the 2 liter K series engine. So before we even begin to start taking things apart, we want to make sure that we actually disconnect the battery on the vehicle, because we're going to be doing some general work around the alternator and using a 10mm wrench undo the negative terminal on your car. The other thing you want to do before disconnecting the battery is make sure that if you are equipped with a factory radio that you have the unlock code, because you'll need to enter that back in when you reconnect the power. I'll start off by sliding off our oxygen sensor. So this is our O2 sensor number 1. I'm going to press on the little retaining tab and then lift this connector off, press down to release, and then disconnect it like this. We're going to do the same thing for the secondary downstream O2 sensor and disconnect that as well. Now you don't have to worry about marking the connectors because they only fit in one way. And take a 12mm socket and begin undoing the top bolts holding the manifold and heat shield cover together on the motor. Now, I don't know if I really shouldn't have to say this, but when you're working on your car, you want to make sure that the engine is completely cold, because the manifold, especially the cat converter, gets extremely hot. Once we've undone the 2 top 12mm screws, take a 10mm socket and undo the 10mm screws that hold the lower portion of this cover onto the exhaust manifold. And there should be just 2 screws. There's 1, and there's 2. Now we just simply remove the cover by pulling it forward and then just fishing the upper O2 sensor wire through the hole. Now on the manifold, there are 3 remaining nuts that need to come out. There's 1, 2, and then a third one right by the alternator that you can't really see in the camera view. They are also 12mm, so we can go ahead and use either a 12mm deep socket or a wrench to take those out. Now if you occasionally find that these nuts are hard to take off, it does sometimes help to use like a good penetrating lube to loosen things up for you. So there you have it. You got your 3 nuts. Safety first. Prior to jacking up the vehicle, make sure you firmly apply the parking brake and have chocked the rear wheels. Using the central jacking point located just directly behind the radiator, lift the vehicle up and then support it on jack stands, as this jack will need to come out to gain access to the exhaust manifold collector. Secure the vehicle on each side using an appropriate set of jack stands on the jack lift points behind the front wheels. So this is what the bottom side of our exhaust manifold cat converter combo looks like. It's held into this collector pipe by 2 12mm spring bolts located on each side of this flange, and then it's secured to the actual engine block itself via this bolt that passes through this welded nut on this bracket. And so the only real challenging part of this whole job is getting a wrench in behind here and backing this bolt out. This is a welded nut, so don't even try to turn that. And then of course, once we've got everything undone, you can sort of undo the O2 sensor retaining harness clip. Just slides off and then the whole thing just comes out. Okay guys, so I got the 3 bolts out. Underneath the vehicle, here's a 14mm head that's a bit corroded, and it was kind of a nuisance to get a wrench over this. I've also undone these 2 springs bolts. And so anyways, I've unhooked the oxygen sensor cables from the appropriate brackets, and to take it out you just simply pull this forward and carefully lift up, taking care not to damage any of the wiring connectors. So this is what the cat converter looks like after it's been pulled from the car. And so the reason why I need to replace this is not because the cat rattles. In fact, it's actually still good. The issue here is that this crack, this 1.5 to 2 inch crack on the front side of the manifold keeps splitting, even though I've taken this out and have repeatedly re-welded this spot over and over again. And it's the reason why it keeps breaking here and leaking exhaust gases and making a hissing noise, as well as screwing up the readings on our O2 sensors, that the flange that bolts on the cylinder head is slightly bowed. You can't see it, but when you bolt it to the motor, you can actually feel this flange flexing, and then as you tighten it down and as the engine heats up, this weld breaks in half again. So you can see here on my motor where the manifold was actually leaking too, because that flange is being warped. There's some blow by here because there's corrosion, and then there's a whole bunch of carbon around here as well, and so that's a sign that it's leaking, and there's carbon soot all over the place. And this is concerning because your alternator, which is really expensive to replace, gets a lot of hot exhaust gases blowing onto it from the leak, and plus that leak on that crack, and you just get this general buildup of CO in the engine bay, which is really bad for the occupants. So another reason why I wanted to replace it with a new one. Here's the replacement cat converter. It's actually purchased from Honda Canada, part number 18160-PLM-A50, and the retail cost on this bad boy is about $1,100 Canadian. And if you ask your Honda dealership nicely, they'll sell it to you for about 820 bucks or so. And so anyways, why did I buy a genuine Honda one versus aftermarket? It's because the Honda one actually is the one that won't throw any check engine codes, which mine, by the way, even with the crack, didn't. But from what I've read on forums, that, you know, they're not carb compliant, or won't pass smog emission tests, or they just aren't built as well. And in the end, an aftermarket cat is still going to cost probably 500 Canadian anyway. So the way I looked at it is, I'd rather just buy OEM, even though they're still crappily made, and spare myself a heartache. Now the other piece you're going to need to get from Honda when you buy a new manifold is this exhaust manifold gasket, part number 18115-PLC-J01. Last thing you want is putting in a new manifold only to have it leak. So this is what it looks like on the inside. It's how it's packed, all fancy. So I'm just going to lift this out. So here's our new manifold. It's got no heat shield, it's got nothing on it. The welds are still crappily done from the factory. It blows my mind at how shitty these things are. But the point is that this flange ought to be true. And of course there should be no leaks. And it is warranted from Honda for at least a year or 12,000 kilometers. Of course we have to transfer this heat shield onto the new cat by undoing these 10mm screws. And we also need to undo our upper O2 sensor and our lower O2 sensor. We managed to get this heat shield off on both sides. And of course, in the process, I've essentially mangled all of the little screws here. So luckily, for me at least, I've got 4 new 10mm screws left over from other Hondas I've worked on. From the junkyard, not from someone's car. Transfer over the oxygen sensors. And so blue wire here on my stock cat is the top, black wire is the bottom. Using a 7/8 O2 sensor socket, and undo it from the cat. Now you want to handle these carefully because you can actually damage an O2 sensor if you mishandle them. Yes. And do the same for the bottom one. I have historically found that the Honda oxygen sensors are actually quite easy to remove. And then last but not least, because I'm cheap, I'm also going to remove the end donut gasket. So you just want to carefully get this off. Now mine is kind of brittle, and I should have probably just bought a new one, but really there's not a reason that you have to get a new one. You just have to be very gentle. And it just comes off like this. Okay guys, so here's the new cat. We're going to take our still usable condition exhaust collector gasket. We're going to carefully slide that on and reassemble the heat shield on the Cat. And I managed to find 4 new 10mm screws. Before I install them, I'm going to use a little bit of anti-seize here, nickel based. I'm just going to put a tiny amount onto the threads. Make sure they're snug so it doesn't rattle. Now the next step here is to reinstall your O2 sensors. So we'll start with the top one. It's really important that you actually apply a thin coat of anti-seize to the threads of your sensor, but not on the sensor itself. And then just snug it up hand tight. Do the same for the bottom one. Screw that in. Hand tight. So prior to the reinstallation of the new exhaust manifold gasket and our new manifold, I'm just going to take a bit of brake cleaner here on a rag and just wipe down the mating surfaces so that they're free of any sort of corrosion, carbon, and dirt that could get in the way of a proper seal with our new manifold. Once that's been all cleaned up, we're going to take our exhaust manifold gasket and we're going to slide it over the studs in the head like this. Lower the new manifold into place and slide it over the studs. And so I can already tell that this manifold, without even bolting it down, the flange is not warped, because look, there's no wobble on it whatsoever. Loosely install the 3 nuts. Okay guys, so with the manifold's 3 retaining nuts in place, we're going to go ahead and thoroughly coat all of our lower exhaust mounting hardware in anti-seize, especially this 14mm holding bolt, actually everything on the bottom end. And what we're going to do is that we're just going to install them and snug them up hand tight. For the spring bolts, you'll know that they're tight because the spring is fully compressed and you won't be able to turn the screw anymore. And that's actually all you need. But what I'm going to do is for the top 3 nuts here with the heat shield exposed, I'm going to tighten these down to 23 foot-pounds of torque. Now you don't lubricate these fasteners because otherwise that changes the torque values. And we're going to turn this to 20 foot-pounds. Again, do not use any lubricant. We need to fish our O2 sensor wire through the heat shield cover. Now these ones you don't lubricate either with anti-seize. Flex the shield around, get these screws started. And same thing, these ones here you want to tighten them down to 20 to 23 foot-pounds. Now you have to be really careful with these ones because these are screws screwing into the cylinder head. And the cylinder head is made out of aluminum. So be very gentle. Go ahead and reconnect your oxygen sensors. Reconnect our negative battery terminal. We'll remove our jack stands and lower the vehicle back to the ground. Also remembering to remove the wheel chocks. Now it's worth mentioning, guys, that over the next few hours of driving this car that you're likely going to see some smoking as well as smelling things that are kind of resembling burning. And it's because from the factory there's a little bit of manufacturing oil or welding splatter, whatever the heck you want to call it, that's going to burn off, and that's perfectly normal. It's very quiet in the car. Sounds exactly like what it was when it was brand spanking new. It's even more rev happy too, because that was one of the things I complained about on this car, was that it lacked responsiveness, which could also result from the cat, slowly plugging up. 286,000 K is a fair bit of mileage, even though a lot of it was highway. So new cat, free flowing, no noise. I'm happy. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing.